please. Like that meeting. It was recorded. Minutes. I am.
They have you on.
Okay, we're on.
I don't know. Are we?
We're on.
I was not ready. Good afternoon. Welcome to the meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. Meetings are broadcast live on cable TV channel 6 and rebroadcast throughout the week. Call 818-548-4013 for program scheduling. All documents related to open session items on this agenda that are received less than 72 hours prior to this meeting and are public records will be available for the review in the Planning Division, 633 East Broadway, Room 103, Glendale, 91206. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Mardian?
Here.
Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Chair Amirian?
Here. Report regarding I have to correct my glasses. Report regarding posting agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Tuesday, September 21st, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Approval of the minutes of August 23, 2010. Anybody has any comments on the meetings, corrections?
I don't have any, but I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Chairman Amirian?
I would abstain because I was absent at that meeting. Item number 4, oral communication. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The Commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or discussion. I have a card here from Mr. John Locascio.
Thank you, Chairman Amirian. My name is John Locascio. I'm the president of the Glendale Historical Society. I'm here today to invite you all to our annual Fall Home Tour, which is this coming Sunday, October 3rd. This year's tour is called Adobe to Atomic, Glendale's Ranch Heritage, and we hope to demonstrate the development of the ranch style of architecture in Glendale from 1871 to 1958. So it should be a very interesting tour. I hope you can all join us. So we invite you all to be our guests, Mr. Platt as well, and we hope to see you on Sunday. Thank you.
Details for where to get tickets?
Tickets are available, tickets are available online currently at glendalehistorical.org. They may also be purchased the day of the tour, beginning at 10:30 a.m. At the Casa Adobe de San Rafael, which is the first home on our tour, and they are $30 each, $20 for Glendale Historical Society members. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Okay, John. Before you go, I am just going strictly by this thing. You can ask questions, but no debate. On the the second portion of the title of the tour, could you elaborate on that?
Well, the ranch house is a very unique California invention. It spread all over the country after World War II, but it really has its origins in California's real Spanish colonial, not revival, but the actual Spanish and Mexican eras before California was ceded to the Union. So what we're hoping to show with the tour is the development, the historic roots of the style in colonial California, and then how it was developed in the 20th century. Modern influences, international style influences came in, and the old ranch style was adapted to 20th century living, and many houses that most people would not consider ranch houses actually have very strong ranch influences and ranch roots, and that's what we hope to show with the tour.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, and I think Historic Preservation society is doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
I think the Commission is doing a wonderful job, too.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see.
Item number 5, comments from commissioners. I would like to move that after item number 7, so the people here who are waiting their turn to present their projects, they can do so and leave if there is no objection to that. Having heard none, we will do that. Is that okay with the staff?
Well, after item 8, so our other staff person can finish his presentation.
That would be fine too. That would, yeah, as long as we don't keep people here. Okay. Old business. 2096 Rimcrest Drive, Mills Act application.
Yes, this is, I'm sure you remember from our hearing last month, the Rice House up on Rimcrest Drive. And at the time that the owners made the application for the Glendale Register nomination, they didn't submit a Mills Act application. And through subsequent conversation, they decided that they wanted to do that. This would be the time for the Commission to consider that based on your previous unanimous approval to recommend the house for Glendale Register status. We still haven't put this on the agenda for City Council. So if you were to say that you think it should also qualify for the Mills Act, we'll just put that together and go to City Council with the full package. And if you said that you didn't think it should get the Mills Act, we could still move forward to Council with the Glendale Register recommendation.
Right, yes.
So the owners weren't able to be here today, and I told them that that would be okay. Hopefully it's okay with the Commission, but on their behalf, they want you to consider their application. So.
Okay.
And here, I put a few pictures up just to remind everyone of the house. This would be our most modern house on the register if City Council votes to put it on the register. So.
Okay. Are there any comments on this Mills Act nomination? Any pros and cons, against, for?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I actually brought this up the last time, and I suggested he should apply for the Mills Act. I believe this house is definitely one of a kind and deserves the Mills Act just like any other building that we've designated. This is a superb architecture. It's craftsman, the crispiness of the design. It's like I said before, we made history by designating this. Of course, it's pending, City Council, and this went against my, thoughts of how old the building should be before we designated. But I was persuaded.
This building defeated you.
Yeah, this one. So, like Mr. Platt said, I made a bold decision at that time. But I'm willing to support this and have the City Council enter into contract for the Mills contract.
So that's a motion, yes?
Yes.
And if I could just add one thing on the nomination. When we met last time, we discussed the idea that they were, the Yegazarians were going up to meet with Gerald Lomax, the architect of the house, to talk about a sunshade that would go, well, not in any of these photos, would go up above this area on the master bedroom wing at the second floor, kind of up around the corner from this point in the lower right photo. And they did go up and meet with him. And while he had already considered that, and he's been thinking about it, everyone involved thinks, let's try to do everything else that they can do to kind of deal with the heat gain upstairs before they do that. So the current plan is to install new kind of Mecco shades that come down inside that'll kind of be more reflective of the heat, I guess. And then also to do some ceiling ventilation fans that won't be visible from anywhere but above. And so that would be the first step, and they're going to see how that goes. And then in the future, they might come back with something with the kind of sunscreens.
That was the Commission's suggestion, or the
No, when we met, they'd already been considering it because they've had the problem for some time, but they didn't want to do anything without Mr. Lomax being involved. So, and I also talked to him on the phone. He's the nicest guy, and so he was saying he really likes the volumes as they are and the design as it is, but he understands the problem they're having, so they're going to work together. So if they ever came back under the Mills Act to kind of do something like that, we would know it's being done with the finest kind of level of architectural attention, but it would definitely be a big change that would probably come back to the commission, so.
So it's not a condition yet?
No, it's not. It's something they anticipate, but I wanted you to know right now that's kind of off the table until they see how this other work,
Yes.
if it solves their problem or not.
Yes, yes. Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second for that?
I second it.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
Chair Amirian.
Yes, before I say yes or no, I like to just clarify something. I know the house very well. If I was here, I would have voted for it as well and joined my colleagues. So having said that and having known the house, I would support that as well, and my vote is yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 2 on B under item number 6. What are we going to do with this? Are we going to discuss this or?
Your mic is not. Properly go.
May I just suggest something? Can we also take that under item number 3 at the bottom? So we can discuss that in detail, and commissioners will have plenty of time, and the audience can present and go.
Now, we do request several meeting comments up toward the top of the agenda, which we there or in the old business. Once we do, that's going to be agendized like item 7C. Once we get agreement among the commissioners.
Yeah, let's do it today. And could you kind of update me as well? When was it decided or suggested to move commissioner comments to further up in the agenda? I don't recall.
It was
that.
about 4 meetings ago.
Fairly recent.
Chairman Amirian, if I may, I believe I may have been the one who suggested this. This is following council practice, that if you pay attention to the council meetings, very early into the meeting is when they make their announcements that they went to such and such event over the weekend, very brief kind of comments like that. So if you had an event that you wanted to announce coming up that you thought the public should know about, this would be the place to do it. One of the reasons to put this at the beginning of the meeting is that I think in the past we've sometimes announced some pretty exciting events after the audience has left because we've finished all our business items, and so I think we're missing an opportunity to talk about some of the things the commissioners are up to.
So,
In terms of the ongoing. Formally put things on the agenda. That's off. This isn't.
Oh, so I'm broken.
Okay. So if we put the commission-generated discussion on old business, that would be the time where the commission, whoever proposes a discussion topic, could poll his or her colleagues and see if there's someone else who agrees to putting that on the agenda, and then we'd move that onto the agenda for the next meeting. So it does seem like more formal commission business than usually what commissioner comments is designed to be.
okay, now if the council is doing that, whatever I have said up to this point is wrong. So I take it back. We can discuss item number 5 right now and do as you have agendized.
Oh, no, I had the commission discussion agendized for old business, so we can either do that now or at your.
Let's do it now. Let's.
It won't take long. I don't
Yeah,
think.
let's do it now. Sure. All right.
Okay, basically what I've done is taken the lists that we've proposed, and I believe I have most, if not all, of the items that we've discussed recently on here, and basically just created a chart where there will always be 2 sections to the chart. The proposed topics, which are items that have been proposed, but the sponsor, let's call that person, hasn't gotten someone to second their idea so that we have it formally on the agenda. And what we've sort of done since Commissioner Vidor came with a longer list of things, we thought, let's break that up into smaller bits, and then as we have time, we'll schedule those things instead of hitting everything at once. So for tonight, we have two topics agendized. Commissioner Mardian's discussion about the permit histories of properties that are nominated for the Glendale Register, and Commissioner Vidor's discussion about the Commission's proper role in doing public outreach and kind of educational programming. And so we'll kind of track those. We won't necessarily have resolution of anything at any point, so we're going to just keep track of how we're talking about it, and each time it comes up, we'll be able to remind the Commission what the discussion has been up to that point. And then down at the bottom, I put a couple of things just to remind everyone what the policy is in terms of one person can sponsor a discussion topic, but needs to have a second for us to put it on the agenda. And this is something I added at my own discretion, so you guys can discuss whether you think this is appropriate. But I thought an item will stay on the list as long as it takes either there's a discussion where everyone resolves the issue, we either take an action or come get the information we need, or the person who sponsored the item withdraws it. Specifically, the idea would be if there's something that someone's interested in but hasn't gotten any kind of consent or interest from the Commission, we don't want that to just drop unless the person who sponsored it wants it to drop. So
under 6B, what are we doing now? Just this
6B was just to let you know what the list is, and then if anyone had, and this would be the time that if anyone has an idea of something that I either missed on the list or something you want to bring up that's new, we'll kind of keep it on the list. And go ahead.
Are we asking any sponsor for any items at this time?
No, because the two items that are on the agenda for today are under new business. So.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Mr. Haddock, so what you just said, I can add if I wanted to discuss an item at this time?
Yeah, that's the goal of this, is to, as commissioners have ideas that they need to discuss formally under the Brown Act in public, then we can do it here. So,
anybody would like to add to this list?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, I want to have a discussion on his, solar panels as it pertains to designated buildings, and also hedges on designated buildings. I don't know now if that's an item that I want to ask staff before we have a discussion. Is it under our jurisdiction to regulate hedges?
Well, we can talk about that, but under our jurisdiction, it's only allowed if we've identified the hedge as being a significant feature of the historic property. Landscaping like hedges generally doesn't come under our discretion. So it would have to be a feature that was identified, whether it's a tree or a hedge or any kind of landscape feature.
So if you have a building that was designated maybe 15, 20 years ago, now you have hedges growing, and it's blocking half of the building.
Yeah, that's an issue. You could raise it. We could talk to the appropriate departments and find out if it's a code violation. I don't know that we have any provision in our ordinance for blocking a view of historic landmarks.
I don't believe that we do, but I also want to caution that we're veering into a discussion.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was.
So I think
this is a topic. We'll put it in
We'll
the
bring it up
agenda
as a
when time
topic.
comes. Yes. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
At least somebody's alert here. Anybody else, Mr. Morgan?
No.
Is there? Yeah.
Yeah, would this be considered when the Mills Act upcoming? I know I had asked for it last
Yeah, we have the
time,
Mills
so
Act.
now I know you have it
Okay.
today, but as far as ongoing for 2011 and 12, is this something that should be on this, or you've already...
No, I think the Mills
approached
Act
it?
will be a
Okay.
regular thing that will be submitted to you.
Okay,
so.
great.
How about you, Arlene? You have anything else to add?
I think I put enough in there already.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Let us move on to new business. 1521 Merriman Drive, Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. On the screen before you is this afternoon's case 15. My name is James. I'm a planning intern here.
James Combs' debut before the commission. So.
All right, Mr. James.
Thank you. Okay, so on the screen before you is 1521 Merriman Drive. Property is a handsome Spanish colonial revival-style residence built in 1930 on spec by its original owner, Alexander H. McRae. Research shows that McRae was a contractor on the project, yet there is no known architect associated with this property. Through numerous ownership changes over the years, there have been no significant alterations made to the property. Planning staff has recently reviewed a preliminary nomination for a historic district proposed by local residents that would include 1521 Merriman Drive in its proposed boundaries. The nomination has not been officially submitted at this time, but it is expected in the near future. 1521 Merriman is a fine example of the Spanish colonial revival style, popular in Glendale through the 1920s and 30s. It possesses many of the hallmark features of the style, including smooth stucco walls, red clay tile roof, and recessed window openings. As you can see on this slide, the forward living room features a large tripartite wood window with segmentally arched head. The central bay is probably the most distinctive feature, here on the right photo. Central bay is probably the most distinctive element of the front facade's composition, featuring a round-headed entry arch before a deep vestibule secured with a pair of wrought iron gates. Above the entry, there are a pair of steel French doors which open onto a corbelled balconette, here in this bottom photo. 3 small window openings punctuate the entry bay. One alongside the entry is covered with wrought iron grills. Jump the gun there. Yes, here, right to the left of the entryway, covered with wrought iron grills, and there are 2 at the second floor, here in the upper left picture, flanking the balconette, and they're covered with decorative plaster grills. Decorative wood shutters flank several windows at the front facade. Like in the living room wing and over here on the upstairs windows. Throughout the house, corbels are used to emphasize changes in mass and support projecting elements on the second floor, as visible in these photos. Only a few alterations appear to have been made to 1521 Merriman Drive. The landing at the front entrance does not appear to be consistent with the period of the house. While the original porch would have taken a similar shape, the current materials do not especially match the home and would likely have been different. The landing's current appearance is modest, however, and does not detract from the overall character of the property. The front door does not appear to be original. The glass panel is certainly a later addition, but aspects of the wood door itself suggest it may date to an earlier period, if not original. At the rear facade, the kitchen was altered in 1970, leading to the addition of a garden window and what appears to be a shallow extension of a wall to infill the area beneath the historic eave. On the right photo there. Our findings of eligibility. After reviewing the nomination submitted by the current owner of 1521 Merriman Drive and its supporting documentation, as well as visiting the site, Planning Division staff concludes that the property does not appear to meet any eligibility criteria for listing on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources. Criteria A requires a property to identify interest or value as part of the heritage of the city. Generally, single-family homes do not qualify under criterion A. Staff believes that it is quite difficult for a property to meet the criterion, and one that does would have some singularly important connection to the broad historical patterns and heritage of the city. The subject home is a handsome Spanish colonial revival house, but this is not unusual in Glendale, particularly in the area in question. Criterion D contains 2 distinct subparts, only one of which must be met. For a property to be eligible, it must exemplify one of the best remaining architectural types in a neighborhood, or contain outstanding or exemplary elements of attention to architectural design, detail, materials of craftsmanship of a particular historic period. Through staff's experience, there are many exemplary Spanish colonial revival homes in the neighborhood. While 1521 Merriman is a beautiful home, it does not exhibit the architectural character of the style as well as other homes in the area. This concludes staff's presentations. Be available for any questions.
Quick question. Was there a back addition done in this house?
Yes, the kitchen is a portion of the back. That's the extent to which staff knows about.
Yeah, it looks like it projects out maybe a foot. You can see it kind of under the eave behind the garden window.
Yes, it's kind of back here by the stovepipe.
Any other questions from Mr. James Combe? No questions? Okay. Now we go and talk among ourselves.
The public hearing?
Oh, yes. I have a card here from Mr. Sievert, Glarham.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the Commission. I'm here to speak about the house at 1521 Merriman and why it's worthy of your consideration on the register. The house, you could say, grew up with Glendale. It sort of tells the city's story. The house was built in 1930. At that time, the city of Glendale was only 24 years old and was considered to be the fastest growing city in America. The Grand Central Air Terminal had just opened. The post office, which is in the National Register of Historic Places, didn't exist yet. And the Brand Library was still known as Mrs. Brand's house. The house was built by a fellow named Alexander McRae. We don't know much about him, other than he was an immigrant. He was 46 years old. He sold paint for a living. And judging by the exhaust fan and the library, he liked to smoke cigars. Since his family only lived in the house for a year, it's a fair guess to say he lost his money in the Depression. Personally, I think this is verified by the fact that he never quite got around to putting the Spanish tile under the sides of the stairs. I kind of like to put the tiles underneath the stairs, but I feel that almost kind of finished Mr. McRae's work, but I feel that kind of violates the history of the house and the story it tells, so I'm kind of torn. And aside from the tile, the house really is a masterpiece. Shortly after it was finished, an assessor for Los Angeles County came to the house and rated the overall construction of the house to be extra special. Special was the highest category you could get, so the guy actually took the time to write in extra on the application. And for the last 80 years, the house has continued to be extra special. It's extra special because it's one of the few houses that hasn't gone through a lot of alterations in the neighborhood. It's virtually unchanged. It's, most of the other Spanish houses in the neighborhood have new windows, they have new garage doors, they have new walkways. This is pretty much in mint condition. It's also extra special because there's not a day goes by that someone in the neighborhood doesn't come up to me and tell me what a beautiful house it is. My wife Mary and I, we bought the house last year. We lived in Valley Village, which was a really nice neighborhood, but people were knocking down houses left and right and putting McMansions up. And one of my wife's life goals was to live in a nice old house, a piece of history. And she saw this house last June, and she fell in love with it, and the kids fell in love with it, and I fell in love with it. But we just couldn't afford it, so we put it out of our minds. But she kept on coming back to this house. She was drawn, so she came back in July and October, and finally we bought the house last November. According to James's report, a casual inspection of the property suggests that there are a number of other houses with that same style that are of similar or greater interest. No offense to James, but the one thing that this house does have that other houses don't is it has two owners who are willing to do anything to preserve the integrity and history of the house. There are other houses in the neighborhood of equal age, but we have no idea what those owners want to do with those houses. When a lot of times when you pay over $1 million for a house, people don't want to be told what to do with that house. And they don't want to do anything that's going to limit the value to sell that house in the future. We have no problem with that. So if the commission votes yes today, you have definitely saved one more historic house in Glendale. If not, you're taking your chances. Because although Mary and I would never do anything to change anything in that house, we live in very uncertain economic times. And, I'm just a phone call away from winding up like old Alexander McRae and might be wearing a barrel over my chest and sleeping under on the freeway in Tropico. So, but even if that happens, the house will be protected if you vote yes. And the house will continue to be extra special for the next 180 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we can discuss among ourselves. Who would like to start first? We are not getting any younger.
Well, I started last time, so somebody else start.
Start?
I can start.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to see the house in person besides just driving by because I was gone this weekend. But I think these are the types of homes that are the hardest for all of us to consider because they are beautiful. The architecture and the eclectic nature of the details of the house are really outstanding. Glendale has so many of these homes, which is kind of what leaves us to what else might be there that could kind of prompt this rising to the level of a historic property. So I'd like to hear from some of the commissioners that personally was able to attend the tour. But I think these are the hardest ones for us to make a decision on.
Right. Anybody would like to?
Yeah, I'd really like to commend you, Sievert, for, well, you know, it was really interesting visiting your home, and it was obvious yesterday or Saturday and today when you spoke that you know, you're an exemplary homeowner and a great steward to a very beautiful house that is just an elegant contributor to a neighborhood that has, you know, quite a few really extraordinary houses in it. And I think you made, and I really commend you for doing your homework too. You know, you obviously thought through everything. You looked at the requirements, and you made a really good discussion. And for me, I agree with Desiree's comment in terms of the house not technically rising to the level of a landmark, in as much as there are, you know, quite a number of Spanish colonial revival homes that are in fairly pristine condition, like your house, and are beautiful. And I think that your house, the way you described it and the way the report describes it, really exemplifies a contributing structure to a neighborhood that's a very, very much a character neighborhood. And also, you know, obviously a historical neighborhood. Whether it qualifies to be a historic district remains to be seen, but it sounds like there's some move afoot to look into that. So my opinion would be that vis-a-vis the criteria, it does not meet the requirements, and this would be consistent with a vote I made on I think a very similar analogous house at the last meeting, where, you know, you're just like gnashing your teeth because, you know, your point was well taken. We want to make sure that these houses are preserved, but I would have to say that it doesn't rise to the level of a landmark, but it certainly is a beautiful contributor to the character of the neighborhood and a beautiful house on its own. And thank you for taking such good care of it. But I would have to agree with the staff report.
Thank you, Arlene. Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Chair, but before I make my comments, can I ask a question? Did I hear there's an application for a district in that neighborhood?
It's not an official application. The commission hasn't seen an application for this yet. At staff level, we've reviewed a preliminary application, and they're making some modifications to that before it comes to the commission. So we can't consider it as an officially submitted nomination because it may never come to us again. That said, I expect that it will fairly soon. But.
Well, you know, I was kind of tossed on this one because over the years we've seen a number of examples of Spanish revival that throughout this area, and I was impressed with the house, but again, I think I'm going to lean towards staff's recommendation because I don't think this reaches to that level, although it has the details, the fine details of Spanish architecture, but I think we have much better examples, and I tried to go over the criteria several times. I particularly, I don't look at these things with a sentimental or emotional value. I look at it whether this is the best example or, you know, one of the better examples. And I think there's quite a few that we've designated in this particular area, on Lawson, Valley View, that are in, you know, I don't think the Lawson one was designated as architectural. It was designated as
for the combination architectural
okay.
plus the Brower family.
And I tried to make that conclusion, but I couldn't get there. I just feel that this doesn't reach the level. I appreciate you coming forward. We appreciate that you're trying to protect this. That's why I asked the question to Jay. if this becomes a district, there will be some protection. So I'm leaning to support staff's recommendation in this case and not support it for designation locally. I hate to do that, but there's several better examples, I think, throughout the city, especially in this neighborhood. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Well, I'm kind of in a quandary, and I kind of agree with my other commissioners. The problem is there's so many Spanish revivals, but when you go inside this house, which is an area that we're really not supposed to have any purview over, it's like being in a time capsule. It's just gorgeous. It still has the screens that they pull down that were the original screens when it was built in 1930. It's got the hamper. It's got the dumbwaiter. It's got everything. I mean, the tile inside is gorgeous. The problem is there are so many of them that are gorgeous from the outside, which is what we're supposed to be concentrating on. I don't know if there's supposed to be a limit on the amount of Spanish Revival homes that we can actually, put on there. I would love to see it on there because I think the people that own it now will take care of it. And I think just the fact that it's so well preserved inside, but does it rise to the top? Driving around the neighborhood yesterday, there were quite a few other homes that were very, very nice in the same way, but I didn't get to go inside on it. So I would have to concur right at this moment that as much as I hate to say it, I don't think it rises to the top that it should. And
Thank you very much. I did have the opportunity to go inside, and that's always a little dangerous thing to do. Because, as you said, the inside is so beautiful. I am also fascinated with the outside of the building, especially the front facade and the south facade. The rear facade, not as much. And I asked Sievert to read the report. He had not report when I met him. To read it and prepare himself point by point to come here and changed my mind. I am afraid you were not able to do that. I agree with my colleagues. This is a very beautiful house, but it does not reach to the level of being a landmark. It just does not do that. So I would support the staff's report and their recommendation, and I would vote against it. I am sorry to say that.
Somebody give him a pity vote.
James, what do you?
I look at these things and I just fell in love with them. But we do have standards that we have to adhere. So that's my comment. At this time, I am ready to ask for a motion. I am not sure if you pitch any further will help. So if you don't mind, we'll just go on. Okay.
If I can just, the commissioners are witnessing a new kind of motion system today where for each property you'll be considering from here on out, you'll receive a double-sided sheet of paper, one with a motion recommending listing and Mills Act, and one with a motion recommending denial of listing. And that's a recommendation to City Council if this went all the way to City Council. So the idea is for commissioners who want to read all of that language into the record. That's probably the best way to do it, so we're most official. You might want to skip over the actual municipal codes citings and all of that, but let's just see how this works, and if you're comfortable with it, and then we'll modify it if we need to in the future.
If it is okay with my colleagues, let us have a first and second, and then the gentleman who makes the motion, he either can ask this to be read, or he will read, or just making a motion and the second might be sufficient.
I think it's good that we read it into the record. I think that's important.
Okay,
so.
That's fine. But first let us have a motion and the second, then...
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, who would like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair. I'll make a motion to not to recommend this to City Council and designate a historical resource, and not to enter or authorize city managers to enter into Mills Act contracted property.
We have a second for that?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Mardian,
Yes.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
Chairman Amirian.
Yes. In this case, we do not read the rest of this thing.
That's fine. Streamlining process.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for coming and
Very
thank you
much.
for. So we have that.
I'll give you a call to follow up. Nothing more said.
Now let me just again be clarified on this thing. The person who makes the motion, he also reads this at that time.
Yeah, I think it's more important for the affirmative motions because we want to make sure that all motions are tied directly to the criteria in the code. So we want to make sure that that language gets into the the public record and the oral record that comes from these. If someone's watching this later on the GTV.
Okay. Now, can we have a little detour now here? Let us be clarified on this thing. All the items here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, do they apply?
No,
Or
of
we
course.
have to make a decision at the moment?
In each case, the staff report will recommend which of the criteria staff believes it appears to meet. And we always say appears to meet in our language,
Yes,
and
yes.
in yours you say it meets. So you'd have to reference back to that. We talked about what we don't want to do is if the commission doesn't agree with staff, so perhaps I think I write a report that says it's one of the best examples in the city, but you say, no, it has outstanding attention to detail, something like that. I want you to have the flexibility to check off, as the person making the motion, which criteria you believe it meets, but it's based on your discussion. It's not just, coming from a commissioner. If you disagreed with the staff report at some point, that would have to be part of the discussion.
Yes, yes. Okay.
I
Right.
think this is a very good idea to
Yes, I
keep a
think so
track
too.
of this. Okay,
And then we'll keep it in the file, and we
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
and we know what we designated.
Okay. Are we ready to move on? 7B, 1446 Royal Boulevard, Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application.
Okay. 1446 Royal Boulevard is a colonial revival style house in the Royal Boulevard Historic District. And so that explains the palm trees, baby ones and big ones that you see on the street. It is a house that was built in 1936 and was designed by Merrill Baird. And I think the Commission's familiar with Merrill Baird's work, not only for the building that we're sitting in, but also for the McCall's house, which is more or less across the street on Royal Boulevard, which Baird also designed as part of the competition that McCall's magazine had. So that was listed some time ago and is now on the register. And so this is the second Merrill Baird house that would be considered for the register. It has a lot of the real character-defining features of the colonial revival, but what I thought was especially interesting with this is that it's a little late in the history of colonial revival, and what we see is kind of Baird playing with some of the ideas and some of the concepts of the colonial revival, but shifting it toward more of the kind of period style that we saw in the 30s, where you're playing with symmetry and you're playing with volumes in a way that when we think of other colonial revivals, especially the ones we have designated, like the Jones House on Kenneth Road or Cedar Knoll, also on Kenneth Road, usually think of very symmetrical compositions, very one- or two-dimensional kind of boxy forms and facades. So in this case, we're playing with some different architectural ideas. Baird designed the house for the original owners, and but there was an interesting second owner in the 1941. And let me find my notes. I'm sorry. Yes, David and Marguerite Cannon bought the house, and David Cannon was a Glendale businessman who invested in Kiev Radio, Kiev AM, which is a station that has a strong connection with Glendale over the years and a strong history in kind of shaping people's perception of Glendale and just kind of getting the name out there. and they broadcast for years from the Glendale Hotel across the street from where we're sitting. And while that's very interesting, and we love to have this kind of history developed when we get these nominations, we don't have enough information that came from the nomination to say that Cannon himself was significant. We're not even really sure exactly what his role was in the radio station. And from what I read, the station became more and more kind of culturally significant in later years. At first, it was kind of a very small station, and probably after his ownership ended is when it really became kind of a more kind of a phenomenon in the area. So again, that's one of the things we love in these nominations, because we learn these kind of pieces of Glendale history, but we couldn't make a significance finding for Cannon's connection to the house. And at the same time, we couldn't make a connection for Baird's connection with the house. But just based on the architectural detailing and the quality of the design and the execution of the design, the more I was looking at the house, I was seeing there were many, many features of interest. This recessed entryway has some really fine woodworking, some fine paneled detail, leaded glass side lights, and is also really characteristic of kind of the New England colonial revival, and then also going back to some earlier colonial precedent back east. You can see the massing with these kind of street-facing gables interlocking. That's something we don't normally see on a colonial revival. But when you see how the detailing with the returns coming off of the pediment ends and how the gables line up, even though it's kind of a shallow projection, it gives a lot of kind of architectural interest to the facade. And then some of the details, I think I have some closer up shots. This kind of paneled wood, almost like a fan light above this rectangular window opening, gives it the kind of idea of a Palladian window. The detailing on the bay with paneling above and below the windows is of interest. And then also this brick soldier course that runs between the first and second floor, where the bricks are, not only are they on their tall ends, but they're also turned on the diagonal. So you get this very interesting texture that I don't think you'd normally associate with any kind of colonial architecture, but it's a sign of this freedom that architects had during the period revival that we see with Spanish and Tudor, and also with this house, where they were kind of taking bits and pieces and coming up with new ideas, and they weren't as bound to the kind of rigid forms of the earlier styles. This is the facade facing Moreno Drive, turning the corner, and the brick wraps the corner. We also have this double height bay that echoes the panel detail from the front, and then also this nice little oriel round window set back to kind of balance off that side facade, which also you can sort of see plays with the volumes again, like at the front facade, where there are actually two gables facing the side. The wood paneling is also of interest just because of the deep recess in the kind of shiplap siding, and that carries around to the rear of the house. And this house has a fair amount of visibility from the street. This is up on Moreno at the sidewalk level. So you can see the rear facade where the brick detailing ended. The wood siding continued. This is a window that was called out in the report. This originally, I think, was a sleeping porch, but it wasn't in this configuration originally. And I think I have the photo here to show kind of during the process of some earlier renovations that the owners had done, this window was brought into more keeping with the colonial revival. So it didn't become a sleeping porch again, but it has more of a connection to the other windows on the house. And at the same time, not at the same time, but the garage is largely in its original condition. The gate is an addition. The pool was an addition in the 60s. What I found interesting was this kind of covered walkway, which doesn't feel original and certainly doesn't feel colonial revival. It appears to be an original feature. So again, that's Merrill Baird kind of making things fit the California kind of lifestyle with indoor-outdoor, but a little bit of coverage when you're coming in from the garage. The owners have made in recent years a few alterations. This Palladian kind of bay was actually added on. So this projecting wing in the back was an original wing that was originally the maid's quarters, was converted into a family room, and this bay was built out. And one of the things that I find interesting about the house is in both situations where new woodwork was done, they did custom milling to create new siding that matched the historic siding. This covered patio was also a later addition, but the basic footprint of the house, except for this small bay projection, is original. So in looking at the house and considering it under the criteria, We couldn't come up with the idea that this was one of the best architectural types in the neighborhood. That's partly because we don't have a full survey, and we don't see as many as many colonial revivals as we do some of the other period styles. So it's kind of hard to put this into context. In the staff report, I did pull out that there are several several colonial revivals in the neighborhood. This is the earliest of the group that was built on Royal Boulevard, and it's probably the best example of the colonial revival on Royal Boulevard. But that alone doesn't mean that it meets the criterion, because the criterion looks at the broader neighborhood, not just at the smaller historic district. But then in thinking about the level of detailing in the architectural design and the quality of the design and the craftsmanship, it really did seem like this jumped up to the level of meeting at least the outstanding, if not the exemplary, aspect of the second part of Criterion D. And it's something that you see all around the house, and it's very much carried throughout, not just at the exterior. So that would be staff's recommendation, that it appears to meet Criterion D of the register criteria.
Thank you. Well presented. Thank you. Anyone has questions from Jay? No questions?
I had a question, Jay. This is for a future discussion, maybe, or the future life of this building. The roof shake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just speaking out loud. It's come to its life already. In a few years, they might have to replace it. What appropriate replacement would you consider?
Yeah, and we've talked about how wood shake, unless you're replacing less than 10% of the roof area, requires a permit, and the city can't write a permit for wood shake ever again. We would consider the best possible appearance of a replacement material, probably some sort of cementitious tile. But I don't want to say where we're going to go at the point. I think the current owners, and they can address this when they speak to you, that they love the roof as it is, and I think they're going to do whatever they can do to keep it going as long as it can. But when the day comes, we'll either be able to replace it with a permitted staff level under the historic district, or if it's on the register. And if it was a material that was proposed by the owners that we weren't comfortable with, that we didn't think was the best possible visual replacement for shake, we'd bring it back to the commission. So.
Okay. Second question, those light pillars on the side yard?
These?
Yeah.
At the garage?
At the garage, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're at the property line or setback, or
I'm not sure.
they
about
meet
that.
zoning requirements?
I haven't heard otherwise, but we didn't specifically discuss it, but we can look into it.
Third question, chimney cap and brick, that was new, part of the addition?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. The white chimney is the original chimney to the house. The red chimney was the addition. Okay. This wing was not an addition, but when they converted it to the family room, they added the fireplace.
I'm sorry, one more question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, yes. You should start with number 4 and go.
Is that some sort of a solar panel in the garage roof?
The garage roof, right here?
Yes.
These are skylights.
No.
No, it's on the garage.
Let's see.
I don't think you have a picture of it.
I don't remember noticing
Facing the
it.
building, actually.
Because that's visible, too.
From the street?
Yeah.
Thought I had a
You
better
can't see it
picture of
from
the
the street. You
garage.
see it from the backyard, actually.
Is it up
Yeah, you can see it from the backyard.
this up here?
You have to be in the yard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
It's a very
Yeah,
thin.
right there. He's
Yeah,
got it on
I'm
the
cons-
lower-
Yeah, that might be a question for the owners. When they
Okay,
come in.
thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Marian. I have a card here from Mr. Snyder.
Thank you, Chair Mirian and Commissioners. Thank you for hearing us today, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have about the home. I know that you did a tour on Saturday. Unfortunately, we were up in San Francisco on convention, so we were not able to be here to let you into the house, which has some incredible detailing as well. But I'll give you a little bit of a history from our ownership standpoint and what we found in researching the house for this particular application. My parents purchased the home in 1991. They were just under 80 years old when they bought the house, and my parents were major restorationists. They owned a lot of property in Los Angeles, much of it dating back into the 20s, and they always would restore their homes and their apartment buildings. We currently still own an apartment building that was built in 1920 in the LA City College district of Los Angeles. And when we've done any restoration of that home, that apartment building, we've done it in the style of the building at often double the expense it would normally need to be. When my parents purchased Royal Boulevard, some of the windows were not operable. There were sliding aluminum doors from the living room to the patio that had been installed by a previous owner, and you saw the window in the back that was not in keeping with the character of the home. They changed all of those things out. They had their painter actually live in the home for almost a full year restoring it, sanding the dentelated moldings throughout the house, taking every window out of the house, sanding it, and putting it back in, and then made sure that the windows that they put in replacement to the ones that were not correct were done in the same style. My father had all of the outside paneling that was adjusted within this remodel milled to match the existing paneling, and when they extended the length of the garage, he also had that paneling milled to match. He felt very strongly about those things. I have helped maintain it for 20 years because my parents were elderly. I'd lost my mother this last January, and although this property is still, as of this date, in the trust, it will be transferred to my ownership on October the 1st. We wanted to wait for the end of a quarter for financial reasons, my sister and I. So the application's in both of our names at the moment. To speak to the stanchions that you're seeing on the side, I would imagine they were probably added with permit back in the 60s under the ownership of Dorothy Newman. Dorothy and her husband were the owners of Citizen Chevrolet in Eagle Rock. This has had a pretty substantial ownership, citizenry. David Cannon, Dorothy Westerling, who owned the home after the Cannons, held the very first tee for the Glendale Hospital Auxiliary in this home. So it's our hope that when we move in this year that we offer the home for revisiting that tee. But we feel very strongly about maintaining its character. When this was in consideration for an HPOZ, I asked Jay at the time if there was any way we could get any kind of variance to be able to put a shake roof back on this house, and he assured me that that was not within Glendale's ability to do. However, there are 2 layers of shake on this house, and it does not leak. And I have every year had our roofer replace and maintain whatever he can on it, because it's my hope to never have to get rid of the shake until someday as there's an approved shake to put on this house. I've seen every artificial shake in the book, and I can't see one that I like for this house. As a matter of fact, the only material we've seen that we like for this house is an artificial slate that looks so real to the slate, and slate we feel would be an appropriate look for the house, but I still would rather have the shake on it, so we haven't changed it. You will note, too, that in the front elevation of the house, Jay, if you want to go back to that, when my parents purchased the home in 1991, there was, you can go to the next shot, Jay. You see the 2 gas lanterns in the front of the home. There was really only one electric fixture to the right of the front door, and it was a newer fixture from the 50s that didn't match the house. I yanked it off. I had the pillars cored, and I personally dug the trenches because I knew our plumber would not. And we ordered the gas lamps and had them put in to match the gas lamp that currently existed in the back stanchions, so we could make the home more harmonious. Other than that, we've done little to change the original intent of the architecture, because we feel very strongly that it should be maintained as it is. One of our desires for the future, and if Jay, you move to the next slide, you might be able to show it. No, probably the next one. The 2 podocarpus on the end of the house seem to be eating the house, and it's not very visible. It is our hope in the next couple of years to remove those trees, find another suitable planning, and perhaps even with the direction of a commission such as this, that we could put more into the yard that would enhance the home and still give us a little bit of shade on that area, but not block its view, because we think that's very important to the house. So The interior of the home has a lot of great details. My parents converted the maid's bedroom and bath into the family room area and gutted the 60s very badly remodeled kitchen. What they put back into the interior is more in keeping with the colonial revival home. However, it is the way we live in a house today. It is a kitchen family room concept. So, and that is what created the fireplace that Commissioner Mardian spoke of on the outside of the house. And we tried to do everything to mask the top of that. My family detested that stainless steel cap, but unfortunately that was all that we could be allowed by your planning department to put on the top of that chimney. We did everything to adjust it, creating a fireplace in that family room. And as you see by the window there, that sleeping porch had been enclosed by some former owner. I have no idea how long ago. And with permit, we enclosed the one window. If you look at that window, there was a window of a different style altogether, which you can see where we have enclosed it. You don't have a photo of that actual window, but we removed that window to create a walk-in closet for the master bedroom, and then creating more of a little sitting area there, which you can now see where the wall has been dropped in, and then replaced that other window, which was not in keeping. But there were actually 3 different styles of window on that elevation of the house before. Now they're all homogeneous, so you can see that we tried to put that all in keeping. The patio roof on the house was added by Mrs. Newman probably about 10 or 15 years, as we can research and permit, prior to our ownership of the home in 1991. So we have done our best to maintain it as it is and would love to continue to do such, and would hope, we're grateful for the HPOZ. We were strongly in favor of that, to preserve the integrity of these homes in this neighborhood. We would love to see you designated historically for its future preservation, and also with the savings that we might incur with the Mills Act, we'd be able to maintain the roof, do the things that need to be done to that home to maintain it in this kind of integrity. I will say, due to the natures of the building material, unlike Spanish colonial revivals, this wood needs to be painted almost annually. I have our painters on this house almost on an annual basis. So they don't entirely paint it, but they touch it up, and probably about every 3 years it gets pretty much repainted. Any questions of me?
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes,
The existing chimney, is that painted brick?
It's painted brick. It has been painted brick since our ownership of the home. When we bought the house, it was a painted brick chimney. It did not have the spark arrestor on the top.
That's right, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Comments, discussions?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. On the topic of criterion D, it's a shame we can't do both criterion, but I realize, and I guess I'll put in a pitch for, obviously one of the important things we need to do is have a survey of the city so that we can make very objective comparisons to other buildings. We always end up with this, well, if we had a survey, we would be able to make a legitimate, valid comparison, but we can't do that. So certainly the House does meet the second aspect of criterion D. I think it's not only exemplary, but unique in a lot of ways because of the way Baird did what he did with the architectural styling and the way he kind of riffed on the American colonial style. But I don't agree with your assessment of criterion C. I think that criterion C should be applied because let me see how I can summarize this. I wrote some notes. I think that Merrill Baird could be considered a citizen who meets aspects of criterion C as an individual contributor to the city. The building that we're sitting in now, I think I looked at the Architectural Resources Group assessment of this, and he really did conceptualize this building, including the really iconic stilts Peloti that they're built on. And C.E. Perkins, who was the city manager at the time for whom the other building is named, said the new building, i.e. this building, reflects the evolution of Glendale from a suburban bedroom community to an independent city. Baird constructed 5,000 homes in addition to several very important landmarks. This one is considered to be National Register eligible, and I think he is an individual whose association with this house elevates criterion C to something we should look at. Now, on the other criteria, David Cannon, as far as I understand, in Catherine Yamada's article of July 18th in the Glendale News Press, it is David Cannon, not Cal Cannon, right? It's David Cannon. David Cannon was the founder of KIEV. I don't think he founded the station when he lived in the house, because I think that happened before the house was built.
Early 30s, yeah.
Right, but he did live in the house during the height of the Depression, and there are interesting things about KIEV. Its longevity and its association with Glendale is a very important radio station that entertained a lot of very important show business and political personalities, and the fact that it hosted during the Depression, it hosted a daily speakers forum for the National Recovery Administration is also significant. So I feel, and it was actually Catherine Yamada, who's a local historian and journalist, her feeling that KIEV is significant, and I think the fact that the man's the founder of the station elevates its significance too. Now, did he have to be in the proposed landmark when he did this important thing? I don't know if that's the case or not, but I think the two of these individuals combined elevate this house to meeting the level of criterion C. So,
generally, just for National Register criteria, which don't legally apply to what we do in Glendale, but just for the precedent, for associations with individuals, you generally look for a property that has the best and most important association with that person. So, for example, even a presidential boyhood home is not the ideal kind of designation, rather than something where significant thinking and significant work was performed. So in this case, I agree that Kiev seems to be very important in Glendale history, but based on the evidence that was submitted with the nomination, I didn't think there was enough to say that David Cannon himself was important. We don't know whether he was just a businessman who invested in the radio station, or if he was an active day-to-day kind of visionary who created this media empire. So I think I left room at staff opinion level to, further research could elevate this, and if someone wanted to bring it back, just to have it clarified for the record, that would be a possibility. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of Merrill Baird's association, I think we have to be careful, because I agree that Merrill Baird does seem to be a very important Glendale architect, but we can't say that all of Merrill Baird's buildings through his career are equally important. So again, it comes back to the idea of what do we know. And when we designated the McCall's house across the street, which Merrill Baird designed, that wasn't designated, he wasn't cited as a significant person. That was partly because that was a design that came to him through the competition, and he just kind of reworked a design that the magazine gave him. This is a building that we know is his creation, and I think is clearly a work of, an architectural mind that's really thinking and doing interesting things. But I would hesitate to put it under criterion C for association with him, unless we had a better sense of his overall work. And I think I put something in there. We know some of his commercial buildings, but we don't know a lot of his kind of residential work specifically. So that's something, and if the commission votes to do that, I think he's definitely an interesting person working in the city over many years. But I think we should keep that in the back of our mind about what do we really know in order to, because we certainly don't want to start saying that there's any one architect who's so important that everything they ever did, unless it was Frank Lloyd Wright or someone in Glendale, was really important. So,
well, Frank Lloyd Wright has always been, not always, sometimes been Frank Lloyd wrong as well.
So true.
Can I ask
by the way, I agree with you 100%. I think we should not go that direction, and I am in favor of going what the staff and you are recommending.
Just to elaborate on this issue, because I don't know if some of you were here at that time, we talked about this particular criterion in the past. We had a presentation. I think Mr. Tim Foy was the planner at that time. When we defined significant of the person, as it relates to the home, to my understanding is, or that was my understanding when they presented the workshop, and I attended a few other workshops aside from that, the person had to live there quite some time, and his dedication to the city would have been looked at as whether it was a peak time of his career. That's when he was living in that, and that's how we should look at the significance as it relates to the building. And I don't know, Mr. Amiran, were you here at that time?
Yes, I was.
We discussed that.
Yes, I
And I do agree with staff that I think we should just, in this particular case, there's no distinct link. We just should go with the criteria.
We had a similar house on Imperial Drive, the Wellman House, which is a nice house architecturally, of course, and it was nominated for significance with Charles Wellman, who was one of the important vice president of Glendale Federal. And when the nomination came in, it was a little weak on that end, so we asked the applicants to kind of get more information. They brought a bunch back, and we were able to say, even though Wellman didn't live there for a huge period of time, he was in that house during the time that Glendale Federal became kind of the juggernaut, and he really boosted the business when he was associated with the neighborhood and the house. So I think the commission saw that as kind of a stronger connection. So,
Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to make one more comment.
Please do.
about my-
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's probably a borderline thing, and it meets criterion D, in my opinion, anyway, so that doesn't really change the outcome. But it's interesting when we have this discussion about famous people because, one, we made an interesting decision about Wyan House, I think, based on the fact that it was the childhood home of Bob Wyan, who didn't do anything significant until he was an adult. And secondly, the way I'm looking at this house is not that Baird is necessarily an important architect of the stature of, say, a Wright or a Schindler, or that the house is necessarily, because it's him, worthy of designation, but I guess I see his contribution to this building in and of itself and the way he conceptualized it as being of significance to the city of Glendale and the way it viewed itself when it was built. And of course that didn't happen until much later in his career, but there were, it was a little bit muddied in my own mind. It just seemed that there was a lot of importance in the history of the ownership of this house. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Ooh.
Anybody else?
Is it comment time?
Well, I've
Yeah.
probably spent more time staring at this house than anybody in this room. It was
Yeah.
literally
That's
across the
right.
street from my house, and I would sit on the steps while I was watering the grass and look at it. And to me, it definitely meets the criteria D. I knew the house when the Newmans lived there, and they were very fine people. They were just very fine people. And I do believe, though, that the criteria C is important. I do believe that some of the people that were in there were important people. I do believe KIV is very important in the history of Glendale itself. So I would nominate it also on criteria C. But as far as being the most interesting colonial revival on Royal Boulevard, it definitely is. It was, having grown up there, it was the most outstanding piece. And the people that lived there knew it, and they used it that way. They had the tea there. They had quite a few social events there. And it was, when it was announced in the Glendale News Press, it was something that people enjoyed to go to. It was something looked forward to. So, and they were, all of them were good citizens in the city of Glendale. I mean, they worked hard, and they liked the fact that they lived in Glendale, and they reveled in the fact that, they were doing something important for Glendale or Glendale High School or Hoover or whoever else that wanted to use the house at the time. So I do agree that it appears to meet the portion of criteria D, but I also do believe that if you were to do a little bit more work, you'd find that criteria C would be part of this thing also.
Thank you.
Yeah, I support my fellow colleagues in supporting this. I find that this, with the asymmetrical characteristics of the house, really presents something unique for the colonial revival style. And it's much more playful, and I think that really goes well with the other Spanish colonial revivals in the neighborhood. It isn't so structured and symmetrical, and I find it very unique and very sympathetic to its neighbors. And yeah, I really enjoyed touring it. Thanks for having it open anytime, Saturday and Sunday. It worked for me.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Samari?
Mr. Chair, I do concur with my colleagues. I think this is worthy of preservation. Although I had some issues with the chimney and the patio cover and all that, but I still want to see something happen to that chimney, or paint the cap, and my other concern is I'll be supportive of this, but if we can condition it that the roof I know I appreciate your compassion and your care on this house, and I just don't want to see asphalt shingles on this house if ever replaced. There's a lot of tiles that are lightweight, equally looking as good, but I don't want to see asphalt on this.
We're thinking into the deep future.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you might not be there for a long but I'll support it based on those two conditions, that the future replacement be other than asphalt, and paint the chimney cap to match the...
We did run into painting the chimney cap. You have a limited number of colors. Okay. It has to be high heat paint. So do you have any specific idea what color that should be?
Can you go back to the pictures?
Yeah. The metal colored makes it recede a little bit, and I wonder if a darker color would make it more.
I didn't think it was much darker color. I mean,
Mr. Marian, if I may, right now, this cap really disappears if you don't concentrate on it. Any other color would make it more accentuated. It's pretty tall and big. So I would not tingle with it, but just continue.
I mean, I don't mind leaving it the way it is. I understand, visually you don't see it in this photograph. It blends in, but it's just a sheet metal. Right? We're designating a home with sheet metal cap. The existing.
Would you like to see the material change or the color?
Well, he's saying the applicant is saying that this was the best solution that the city accepted, the building department. And I don't know what else would you be able to do with it aside from paint it.
We did have a presentation several months ago about these chimney shrouds, looking at different styles of shrouds. And this was one of the the more common ones. This seems a little big because the chimney itself is pretty massive. Yeah. In terms of shape, there were other shapes.
Right.
But this, I can't say that anything we saw is more appropriate than this.
I have no problem
There's the
with
possibility of an exposed spark arrestor also that meets code because the area is so big. Spark arrestors are usually limited by the square inch, how big they are that way. There's a possibility something like that would work here. But I think the question really is will the commissioners agree on this as an issue? And if it is, we can work that out at staff level. And if we need to, we can bring it back to the commission.
I think you can work it out with the staff. You don't have to bring it back.
Well, only if everyone agrees to that. So.
In my opinion. Yeah. But the main concern I have, how you deal with the cap, is something that's simpler. But I want to condition the roof tile, the roof treatment, for future replacement.
No. Okay, on that one as well, you are saying it shouldn't be asphalt.
It shouldn't be asphalt. Not on this particular home. You lose the whole character. It's a beautiful home. It's designed well.
How about if you reward that and say that for any roof replacement, they come back to staff, and if the staff is not satisfied, it comes back to the commission. Would that be more democratic?
That's standard practice, yeah.
Right. That'll happen anyway.
So that's going to happen.
I just want to see, I don't know how you deal with it, but maybe the staff, staff changes, whoever's at the counter, I'm sure they'll consult with you.
The only concern I would have thinking into the future is if we said no to a specific material, when I look at this, I think asphalt tile would look better than a lot of replacement materials that I've seen. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what we'll have available in 10 years, 20 years, whenever.
Well, let's deal with it when the issue comes up then.
Arlene has something to say.
I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. It's not so much that you want to see in-kind replessment because the look of the houses. And I happened to see a house that I know because I spoke to the owners had a shake roof similar to this, and they had the same problem when they had to replace their roof, and so I don't know the quality of these materials, so I can't make any expert comment on it, but there was an in-kind replacement material that looked just like a shake roof, but it wasn't wood. It was something else, so...
It sounds like our applicants looked at all of those, and none of that's...
Okay, and none of them really appeal to you?
It's a tough one to
It's a
replace
tough one.
wood shake.
But you wouldn't want red tile on it either, so it's
No,
not
I
just...
wouldn't want
It isn't just asphalt, you just want it to...
No, I just don't want any cheap asphalt. I'm sure there's high-quality asphalt. I
Okay.
just don't
But
want
the
any other
process is
regular...
going to take care of that.
Yeah, we
Okay.
would definitely, you just naturally, both in the historic district or as a registered property, we'd look at the roof and bring it to you if we needed to.
Thank you.
I am not going to repeat what my colleagues said. I am going to support the project, but at the same time, I don't want us to just brush it off. Arlene and Mr. Morgan know the history of city better than I do. So this criterion, see if that is going to apply. I would like you to do some research and come back, and I would not want to vote on this thing until that comes back. Rather than accept it right now and vote on it as criteria C as well.
Why don't we, Mr. Chair, why don't we ask the applicant? I mean, it will be, if it's designated under D, there's
No,
just
it is designated and I am ready to vote for it.
the applicant
but-
wants to come back and add that to it.
Right.
No.
them.
Yeah, but you wanted to add to it as
I didn't want to add
No, Arlene.
Arlene wanted to add the
No,
signature.
if you don't mind.
I think, I'm not going to speak for Michael, but I think I was just commenting that I thought it was of interest, and I think if the applicant wants to pursue that, that's up to them, but I certainly am not going to.
Okay.
This is their decision to make, and if they wanted to say, okay, let's go back and find more, fine, but if they don't, that's okay too.
Okay. I misunderstood. I thought that you want to make it a condition.
No, not a
All right.
condition, I was
All right,
just making a comment.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think.
Is it a must that you speak? We have closed public comment. If it's a must, then come forward.
No, I just wanted to address that issue. I just wanted to let you know that in researching this, in addition to our own research, we hired Timothy Gregory to do research on this. He researched this very thoroughly, and he gave us a report that we did pass on to Jay, and I think it was as much as he could find about David Cannon and all of that research. I think he even mentioned in there, that wasn't there a son of Cannon that was the mayor of Glendale? And he gave us quite a bit on the house, but that was one thing we did not get. I don't want to take your time, but I just wanted to let you know we've done a lot of research with
All
you.
right, good to know. No new facts coming.
I said I don't want to say a lot my colleagues have said, but I will say, I think the house is wonderful. It is so beautifully detailed, and I think it under criterion D as exemplary architectural design, it fits very well, and the architect has done a wonderful job on this house. I looked at it back and forth, and if I may, I would like to make the pilaster and the light part of the approval as well. I do not want that to be removed because of some building and safety requirements that it is not in setback or is in setback. If it's a historic thing, it will remain over there. We are judging a historic building.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't want to interrupt you, but that has been done after the house. It's not historical. I don't agree. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't agree.
How can you disagree with the chair?
I am sorry, but
I'm just, no, but,
you know.
In general, we can't override the building code or the zoning code, but if it were a problem and they were cited in the future by Neighborhood Services Enforcement or any other agency, and they needed to get a variance for that, we might be able to say that the commission or on the historic level, we support the presence of this pilaster, this pier, or
and
whatever.
can this be kind of recorded, what you said?
Well, I suppose
no, we
recorded is
wouldn't do
already
that.
public, right?
We wouldn't do that.
No.
Okay, fine. All right. All right, then, yes, please.
I'm sorry, I was going to suggest that if it was of interest to other commissioners as well, you could include that the nomination includes the pilasters, the driveway pilasters. This would be similar, I think, to the Seeley's building where a lot of the signage was explicitly called out as part of the nomination in order to protect the signs and the neon on the building.
I would like to do that, but apparently Mr. Mardian is Dead against it.
Well, this also falls into what we'll be discussing later in the afternoon.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, whether, so we could put a condition that research be conducted to see if there are permits for these, and if there aren't permits for these, the owners would be required under the Mills Act to get permits, which the commission would support
Okay.
at whatever level it goes. So.
All right, fine. Okay, everybody says his thing, and may I have a motion on this nomination?
Oh, okay. I, Commissioner Vidor, will move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommend that City Council designate the property at 1446 Royal Boulevard as a historic resource.
I second that motion.
Under which criterion, Commissioner Vidor?
Oh, under criterion D.
Which part of criterion D? Thank you.
Even with it in front of me, I can't get it.
It's the first time you're
All right, yeah. You made a beautiful sentence.
Thank you. So moved.
Do we have any second?
I second it, Mr. Chair.
All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Vidor,
Yes.
Commissioner Mardian,
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes.
Chairman Amirian.
Yes, thank you.
What? Take care.
Did you get the call?
Okay. 7C. Discussion regarding commission review of properties permit histories in its consideration of applications to the Glendale Register and/or Mills Act program.
Okay, and this is the way these will work in general is these are the commission-generated discussion items. In the case of both of these, there was a component where the city attorney needed to be had this gone over with. So I talked to the city attorney, so I'll just kind of preface each one with what the city attorney said and then open it up to the sponsor of the item for the discussion. And in asking about whether it was within the commissioner's purview to ask people to make sure that we have permits for all components of the building that you're looking at and designating, the city attorney or assistant city attorney Mike Garcia thought, yes, that's a very good idea. We don't want a city commission designating a building that we can't say that there was, city approval for any aspect of. The fear would be that the owner at some point would say, but the city designated this building, and, that chimney was part of the designation, but they don't have a permit for the chimney. So it is within the commission's purview to either, through the Mills Act, like we discussed, kind of mandate that permits be pulled, and this would apply to the house at 1339 Romulus, where there was the carport converted to the garage, and the commission voted to approve that pending obtaining permits for the new work. The situation would be, what if they can't get a permit for the new work and then have to do some restorative work or something to mitigate it? In that case, I think we'd come back to the commission, and then there'd be an ongoing design discussion. But that was the city attorney's opinion, so this is Commissioner Mardian's item.
Thank you, Mr. J. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may start, I asked this a while back, and I'm thankful for Jade bringing it back and having the support of the commission. The reason I brought this, we had several cases in the past that came in front of us where there were additions with no permits. I felt concerned because exactly what J.R. said earlier, and may backfire on us or set precedent in the future that a building is designated, but it doesn't have certain permits on certain legal issues. And I felt that the applicant should know that ahead of time. In case those things are non-conforming, do not meet zoning requirements and building requirements, we don't want to designate something that's going to come back and say, well, you designated like exactly what you said, but now I can't get a building permit. And I think that's where the legal matter comes in. And we don't want to be, the police of this, but I felt it should be part of our, designation criteria. Not necessarily the way this 7 criteria or the 7 criteria that we have, but at least we want to make sure every building that we designate has permits, whether it's roof permits. I mean, I don't know if my colleagues know, you're required to have a permit for a water heater, garbage disposal, toilet replacement, all kinds of things. So why aren't we controlling this by our commission saying, okay, if it doesn't have a permit, then it should get a permit. And just like anybody going to the counter, getting a window permit. I mean, we're required to have a window permit. Just because we designate it as historical, are we saying it's okay? I don't think that's right. That's why my discussion is brought forward. And I feel very concerned that every building that comes to us needs to be permitted eventually by the Mills Act or one way or another. Because unless there's another item I wanted to mention, maybe we can, if my colleagues feel that it's not an appropriate way to approach it, we have the zoning requirements allows us to have 100 square feet of addition to administrative exception. So if the addition is so small, administrative exception is easily obtained than a variance. You know, variance is a longer process. It requires findings to be made, 4 findings, and sometimes these findings are very hard to make. On 100 square feet, under 100 square feet, you can add with an administrative exception and they can get away with it. But in particular, we have garages, setbacks, encroachments, patio covers. These are all issues that we've faced in the past on some of these designations. And we've kind of ignored it, to tell you the truth. Yeah. And we brought this up a few times, and we said, well, the house on in our Devon area, there was a brick building in the back that was added without a permit, but we let it go. So if ever a question comes up in the future or they're cited, he's got an issue there.
Yeah, and we would be very careful at staff level to never use the fact that it's designated on the register or in a historic district to let someone, get around an enforcement issue. If they were cited by any of the city agencies that have enforcement powers, we wouldn't do that. What we would do is if the commission notes something like the piers with the lamps on them at the garage, if we know in advance that that's something we're concerned about, we're going to work with the applicant and with the city to get the variance or the AE or whatever it is. In terms of permit history, I would just be cautious in how far we do this because we are not an enforcement body and we do not have any legal ability to enforce, but we can ask someone as part of the Mills Act to do something because that's a voluntary program that they're getting into. But one of the levels of, I don't think we want to get down to the level of do they have a permitted garbage disposal. And in general, when we pull the permit history, sometimes it's hundreds of pages of scribbles and indecipherable stuff. So I tend to kind of cull that out and kind of only give you things that relate to the pool construction and to the addition and kind of the things on the outside that we care about. So unless you tell me otherwise, that's what I would continue to do. And then I'm going to add, and I think I did in at least one of these staff reports, add a section to show that we're kind of vetting the permit history a little better so that everything that we see as being a significant feature, for example, on the house on Royal, there's a long permit history and pretty much everything except what you found. Even the solar installation on the garage has a permit. So we could kind of continue working that way. And then make the condition as part of the Mills Act. So,
I have a question to Mr. Mardian as well as you, Jay. If we followed strictly this permit thing, Mr. Simon would not have been able to do his Watts Towers.
That's right.
And in historic buildings, well, we have not come across, but often, I'm just coming from Prague, and last year I went to Barcelona. Gaudi would not have been able to do his churches.
Right.
We have to be careful now. Asking permits for these buildings, if people find out that this area is added 40 years ago, and the building department asks them to permit that. Building department does not know really how to massage this thing. Mm-hmm. They will create an environment that's almost impossible to preserve that. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I'm not sure how do we handle that. It's a very sensitive thing.
Mm-hmm. I think the because the commission will be hearing these things and there'll be a discussion before it goes into the vote for the Mills Act, that's the time where we can filter out what's really important and what might not be important. And I think the one you mentioned, Mr. Mardian, on 1640 Art Even, which had the brick Tudor house, and it had the brick extension on the back, a very nice, design-wise, I don't think we had any issues with it. And it had some age to it. I don't know how old it was, but it didn't look like it had been built any time in the last few decades. And there'd be some concern that if we then sent someone back to bring that, to get permits now, that would bring it up to current code, we might lose something. There might be requirements made that would take away some of the character that's there. So I think we just have to, at the commission level, be careful when we're putting that in as a requirement for the Mills Act. But for something like a chimney, for something like, I think, the garage enclosure on the modern house on Romulus, that certainly makes sense. And, ultimately, it's your decision. And until there's a majority vote on the commission, we're not going to start asking for things to be permitted if we think there might be a kind of a downside to it.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not trying to be the police or trying to cite people or anything like that. I just want to make sure some reasonable items, like small items, I have no issues with. But if a 300, 400 square feet has been added to a home, it shouldn't make a difference whether it's historical or a average house somewhere else. That's substantial amount of square footage, because that's a question that will be disputed also in the assessor's record. Because the assessor shows some other square footage, the building department shows the different square footage. So we can leave it at that, and as we're practicing now, if we feel that this home requires to get a permit, we have to have him get a permit. How he does it, it's his own,
And that raises, when they look at it, the building department's looking at the 300 square foot addition, not just as 300 square feet of footprint, but also as structure and windows. The building department has started enforcing energy guidelines requiring thermal paned windows. And it would be a shame if we were responsible as a commission to have someone have their original windows removed so that we could put in energy efficient thermal pane replacement windows. So that would be one of the downsides of and I think that's where we can discuss these things in this forum before we condition that kind of permit as part of the Mills Act.
You bring an interesting point. Let's say on a designated home or a contributor in a district wants to change the windows. Now the building code says for bedrooms you have to have certain specific size. You have no choice but to approve it, correct?
No, well, we can invoke the historical building code for any
Does
building.
it allow you? Yeah.
Yeah, which may not, life safety issues always trump historic issues if we can't come to a solution. And we'd have to deal with that on a design level, whether it's at staff level or commission level. But what I'm concerned about is that if we started doing this on a routine basis, we might start losing historic fabric in order to make it meet current code. So I think having the commission have the flexibility of doing it case by case, and if there's something that you're really concerned about that we think could be an issue, especially if it were a safety issue, then I think we should make sure that there's a permit for it. But
legally, we're not obligated. I mean,
we're not. According to the city attorney, he didn't object to us doing it and thought it was a good idea. And I think making sure that, an addition meets zoning code and lot coverage is one thing. Making sure that its windows meet, energy code is going to be another thing. So I just want the commission to be aware of, how complicated it can get when they start going back through, building and safety review. You know.
That's something that, I've been...
But right now, it is not our jurisdiction to request.
We're not an enforcement body, no. What the city attorney said, I mentioned specifically the case of the garage that had been converted from a carport, and he said it's okay for the commission to make that request and to look into permit histories and condition it as part of the Mills Act, but he didn't say that we're required to do it at all. So.
Okay. Now, but nothing changes then in that case. It is just like the garage. We look at it, we say, get this permitted.
Yeah, I think the changes, we can say now the commission has a policy, if you guys vote, if the commission votes to do that, to make sure that, when you're concerned about whether something's permitted, that the commission has this discussion and that you have the ability to put it in as a Mills Act condition. So it's your choice.
I think that's a good idea.
Yes.
I mean, at least make people aware that there's a possibility that you might have to go get a permit for certain, and I'm willing to, live with that.
Okay.
Great.
Okay?
So,
Thank you again, Jay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues.
thank you. That was a good discussion. Okay. We move to 7D, discussion regarding HPC and Commissioner's roles in potential community outreach and education efforts proposed by Commissioner Vidor.
And let me introduce this one, because this was also discussed with the city attorney. And the city attorney has no issue with commissioners doing any kind of outreach or educational work as private citizens, and that's always been the case, or as commission members participating in, for example, a historical society event of some sort, or a panel discussion, or anything like that. There's concern about Brown Act issues. If the commission were to sponsor something like that, the commission couldn't sponsor a public forum on, a historic district and have all 5 commissioners present as members of that discussion panel. That would be kind of stepping over the Brown Act line.
Okay.
That was
Thank
the
you.
discussion we had, so,
Thank you.
which I don't think applies necessarily to all of the items that you have here.
Okay. Thank you. Arlene, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, that could be, in essence, the discussion, I guess. The reason that it came up was sometimes I hear comments, people don't understand certain things. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance out there, and obviously the Historical Society does a wonderful job of reaching out to the public, but we as the, I guess, gatekeepers, for lack of a better word, of the Historic Preservation Ordinance, I kind of feel like we have some responsibility, or at least we should be able to take the initiative at the behest of the city to help educate the public, because there is quite a bit of disinformation about the historic preservation element and the ordinances. So could a commissioner, per se, go to a meeting, let's say some group wanted to hear about how to get, a house landmarked or something related to historic preservation issues, and could a commissioner go there to answer questions or to speak? Or would that be something that...
That's definitely allowed. Commissioner Mardian and I have done a couple of kind of educational meetings with realtors in the past, and that was the concern. If it's 2 commissioners or less participating in something like that, it's okay. Actually, in that case, since that's a private group inviting commissioners to come, I think all of you could go to something like that, and that wouldn't be a Brown Act issue, because you wouldn't be discussing, you certainly couldn't discuss any item that was under your consideration or that could be expected to be under your consideration. But in that case, I don't picture a group wanting all 5 commissioners at one time. It's like they're going to pick and choose depending on the subject and who's interested. But it's definitely allowed. So, and I would think encouraged. It's a good thing.
But that's allowed, but wouldn't you think that in that kind of a situation, the commissioner should represent himself rather than representing the city? Because that's an individual act and outside of the perimeters of our official duty.
No, I think city officials are allowed to act as city officials in settings like that. Just the council member is introduced as council member X for many different events. And you have standing in the city as appointed commissioners, so you're part of the kind of the hierarchy. So I think you certainly could. You don't have to. And often, I think the situation would be different if you were coming to a hearing to testify. You couldn't testify on behalf of the commission unless the commission had made that decision and there was a vote and there was a reason to be doing that. So that's when you have to be a private citizen rather than a commissioner. But if you're invited to a forum to talk about historic preservation in Glendale, and you're invited there presumably because you are a commissioner, I think it's kind of an expectation that you're going to represent the commission there and hopefully, have set people straight. Like you were saying, if people have their facts wrong, this is the body that hopefully provides the education so people know how the ordinance works and what we're trying to do.
We have to be careful because In the past, I don't know how they operate now. In the past, Arts and Culture Commission had issued city cards to their commissioners.
We do the same thing.
We have cards.
And
We don't
Get
have
you
any.
one. You
I
got
don't
your
have
card?
any
I have a
card.
card.
I don't have any card.
let us know. We'll get you cards.
But we have to use that very. I don't have anybody. Nobody makes card for me. You are making.
That was a request.
I thought you had
my
cards from
picture
a
on
long
it.
time ago.
Yes. No, I don't need it because I think it is wrong. But it is wrong how to use it. It is wrong.
You have to be careful, of
We have-
course.
I met one of these commissioners in the meat counter somewhere. He gave his city card to me.
No, and I think
that's wrong.
that's fine when you're.
That's abusing your position. You know, you have.
It's abusing your position to ask for a discount on your meat. But
Exactly.
No, he gave it to me, not to sell.
He was a commissioner,
Yes.
so you were.
Yes. Yes.
I think, like with everything, you have to use your judgment. But I
Yeah.
think to represent the preservation kind of ethic of the city, I think it's a very good thing to have you out and telling people I am Commissioner Amirian and call me if you have any questions or call staff or whatever it
is
is.
when you are doing your work as a commissioner, not if you are soliciting a project from a client.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Right.
No, of
You
course.
have to be
Yes.
very
Yeah.
careful.
Yeah. That's.
But anyway,
that's
I don't need a card.
We have the conflict of interest rules and all of that
How
that you have
could
to
you not
abide
have? We
by.
had 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
Look, I am nobody here.
We're putting down. You want cards?
No, that's okay.
No,
but
we'll order you
it's
some.
Make sure they say chair very large. Very prominently it says chair Amirian.
Mary. Yeah.
For all your preservation needs.
Actually,
I didn't know that. Anyway.
when I was in Michigan, Mr. Chair, on the same topic, I gave one of the few people there my card. They were board members. They were shocked that we have business cards.
I think it's appropriate.
No. But I thought it was very good to have it.
I think you should.
I think you
ask,
should have badges.
Well, we do have badges,
I think
too.
you should ask city attorney what happened. I didn't get a card. You just
Okay.
investigate that.
Put in your
But on the
protest.
So
same,
anyway,
on the
let's-
same note, Mr. Chair, following up what Commissioner Vidor said, can we do? I mean, I think community outreach is very good. Can we do a yearly public meeting with staff and invite the public and tell the city what's going on and what our preservation program is? What our
Yes.
We could, I don't see any reason why we couldn't use this meeting to kind of, or move this meeting to an evening session, call a special meeting where more people could come. We could do it in January or in our December meeting to kind of have a year-end review or beginning of the year, wrap-up of what happened the year before. I don't see any reason. It is kind of unfortunate because of our, the afternoon meetings work for everyone's schedule, theoretically, but we very rarely have anyone in the audience, and it would be nice to, possibly do that. So that would be, I'm not sure what the mechanism for that would be.
I think we would simply cancel one of our regular meetings and have a special meeting in an evening time. We look with the calendar of other commissions to find a time that would work, but I think we can look into the option of having an annual, like the January meeting be an evening meeting. That could be, as Jay said, sort of an annual review and an opportunity to revisit
I think it's
ordinances and elements and what the commission's purview is and some of your responsibilities. I think it would be a good educational piece for the commissioners as much as anybody else.
Yes, I think so. All right. Thanks. Or Mr. Mardian, you are just
But
shining today. Okay.
well, I mean, I like to get some.
For Commissioner Vidor's, I think you had three kind of subcategories under this kind of outreach and education. One of them was about property designations, one about districts, and I think you were thinking more kind of individually going out, or as the commission?
Just to be able to be present as a commissioner, not necessarily representing the views of the commission, you're representing the views of yourself as a commissioner, and just disseminating information. I mean, the question comes up is it okay to be an advocate? The word advocate comes up occasionally. Are preservation commissioners advocates for historic preservation? Is there another word? Is there a difference between advocacy and education and dissemination of information and people get very hung up on the lingo, and then we've had city council members, not any recently, but say, oh, commissioners shouldn't say anything because they shouldn't support this or that. And, I think what's in your ordinances that you approved, if you can help people better understand those ordinances, then you're doing this, you're working at the pleasure of city council. You're not working against them, so.
And I think you've hit that fine line between the education and advocacy, and I think it's really important for each commissioner individually and obviously as a group to recognize that line. And I think when you're talking about facts and you're talking about the ordinance and what the criteria for designation are, I think that's really the place you should be coming in on. If an individual commissioner, and I have heard from people like, oh, a commissioner told me I should nominate my house, I think that gets dangerous because they have kind of maybe an unreasonable expectation that this is, something that they should do. So I think telling people about the process of designation and talking to staff and, how that works is the way to go.
Absolutely.
But have you done this?
I have wanted to tell the people that they should come to they bring their project. Is that okay? But I haven't done it. I wanted to tell them to.
Well, I think when a commissioner tells a member of the public, hey, your house is really great and you should designate it, you should apply for it, you're not telling them how you're going to vote necessarily, but you're kind of creating an expectation.
Yes, of course.
And I think that's where you really have to be careful. And that's where the education advocacy line gets a little tight. So.
Well, I'm satisfied with the discussion, and I like your idea of having some kind of meeting that involves the public and that focusing on landmarking and historic districting and disseminating information is.
And I think our January meeting is probably the best place to do that because we normally combine November and December together. This year, looking ahead at the calendar, you guys can all review your calendars. It's kind of off topic, but we could theoretically have a hearing Thanksgiving week the way it falls. It's the Monday of that week, but in general, a lot of people seem to take off the week. So just next month, we'll have the discussion of how to do the November-December hearing. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, can we move on to 8A, please?
Yes, we can.
Presentation by Eric Krause, Senior Planner, regarding the city's environmental review process with regard to the historic resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Eric Krause. I'm the Senior Planner for the Planning Department responsible for CEQA review for the city. And Jay had asked me to come today to talk to you guys a little bit about how the city processes CEQA documents and what the general gist is for CEQA under when evaluating historic resources. And for those of you who don't know, CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act, and it's a state law basically that was adopted in 1970 that basically requires or mandates that projects are evaluated for their impact on the environment. And that there's basically the whole purpose for CEQA is to inform government decision makers and the public about the potential significant environmental effects of proposed activities, identify ways that environmental damage can be avoided or significantly reduced, require changes in projects through use of alternatives or mitigation measures where, when feasible, and to disclose to the public the reasons why a project was approved if significant environmental effects are part of the project. And there's actually 7 different resource areas that we look at in environmental documents, and one of those being cultural resources, and that's kind of where you guys might have to adopt or certify an environmental document based on if there was the only sole purpose for doing the environmental was just for cultural resources, then it would become upon you as the acting as a DRB as part of a listed resource to also review and certify or adopt the environmental documents. So that's kind of why we wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. My understanding is we have a case that's going to be coming up relatively shortly with one of the listed properties for the city of Glendale, the city of Glendale owns.
Yeah. Not a case at this point, but the Brand Library is going through significant renovations. At this point, we don't know the scope or the extent or what some of the solutions will be to some of the HVAC and seismic issues that they have. So there's a possibility. Eric will talk about most of the things that we deal with are exempt from CEQA because we're a board making sure that the work meets Secretary of the Interior standards. Because this is a big project with some uncertainty, we wanted to do this as kind of a refresher or reminder. about where brand might go and where, many other issues might go in the future. So.
Okay, just getting back to the discussion of cultural resources in CEQA, there's 4 different items under cultural resources that need to be looked at. The one would be historical resources, the other one is archaeological resources, paleontological resources, then human remains. Those are all included within the threshold discussions for cultural resources under CEQA. Excuse me. So the way the city evaluates some of these projects is we do a real basic 3-step process. First thing we need to do is determine whether or not the project is considered a historic resource under CEQA, and there's specific definitions for that. That's actually in the body of text for the CEQA itself. And so there's 3 essentially parameters to the definition. So a resource listed in or determined to be eligible for the State Historical Resource Commission for listing in the California Register of Resources. So that basically means if it's already in the state database or it's listed under state resources, then it's automatically a resource under CEQA. If the resource was included in the local register of historic resources or identified as a significant resource under a survey, then those would also be considered resources under CEQA. And that's if we had done, like for instance, if we did a cultural resource analysis, let's say we did one for Cumberland Heights when we were looking at some of the properties over there. So if one of those buildings was determined to be locally eligible, then that would fall under the parameters of CEQA, and we'd have to take a look at it to make the determination on what level of environmental review would be necessary. And then also under CEQA, any object, building, structure, site, area, place, record, or manuscript which a lead agency determines to be historically significant, and that's provided that the lead agency has substantial evidence to support the record. So it allows the local agencies, even if there's not a listed property under the state or even the local register that says you have a historic resource, it still gives the city, us being the lead agency, the parameters to make a determination that it is in fact a historic resource that should fall under CEQA as long as we have significant information to back that up. And kind of when we're looking at buildings when they come across for projects, whether public or private, the general rule under CEQA is that the building's more than 50 years old, and that kind of goes back to the state list of historic resources. Then it's kind of you really need to take a look at that building automatically and see if there's any kind of historical resource on that subject site or the property itself that's being proposed as a resource. But in Glendale, we have the demolition ordinance, which kind of, when the city council adopted that back in 2003, they kind of set that threshold at 30 years rather than 50. So whenever, if a demolition permit comes in, then we need to take a look at it if it's 30 years old or older and determine what level of CEQA review is necessary for that. So, let's see here. Kind of went over this a little bit on what the definitions of a historic resource are. And then the second step is if you do have a resource on the site, you need to kind of determine if there's going to be a substantial adverse change to that resource. So if there is, then that would be considered a significant impact under CEQA. So the way we look at that is a substantial adverse change includes like demolition or destruction, relocation, or alteration such that the significance of a historic resource would be impaired. And so, in other words, if whatever work you're doing on a project, if it goes to a level where that resource would no longer be a resource, then that would be kind of considered a significant impact under CEQA. So, and let's see here. Bear with me a minute. Okay, so after substantial resource, it basically talks about substantial adverse change. It talks about whether or not the resource is materially impaired. So under that, you're looking at whether or not the building would still convey its historical significance, and that would justify to be included in eligible for inclusion in the California Register for Historical Resources, or that would be the same for the local register as well. And whether or not it would be materially impaired if it counts for inclusion in the local register for historic resources, or its identification in historical resource survey, or conveys a historical significance that justifies its eligibility for inclusion in the California registers. So basically, it gets back down to the whole thing of if the resource can no longer be listed, then that would be considered a significant impact under CEQA. In determining through through the whole evaluation process through environmental, it's either going to be categorically exempt, or there's going to be a neg deck prepared or mitigated negative declaration, or an environmental impact report. And under CEQA, there's like 33 classes of exemptions, and one particular one that's a class 31 is specifically for historical resources. So if whatever is going on with the project, if everything is done and it's, like Jay indicated, if it's consistent with the Secretary of Interior's standards for guidelines for treatment of historic properties, then you can consider it as exempt under CEQA, as long as everything we're doing is consistent with those standards and guidelines. Under a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration, there's a negative declaration is required if well, let me back up. There's there's this initial study that you need to go through the process. If the project's not exempt, you need to go through an initial study checklist under CEQA, and that gets back to looking at the 17 resource areas that we kind of talked about a little bit before. And then if you cannot make a finding that there's no impact whatsoever on the historic resource, then you prepare what's called a negative declaration. So you've evaluated the project and you kind of determined that the impact would not occur to the historic resource, then you prepare a negative declaration. If there's a potential for an impact, but you can mitigate it to a point where there would no longer be an impact, then you prepare what's called a mitigated negative declaration. And kind of some of those standard mitigation measures might be I'm having a hard time explaining this because I'm not trying to get too literal, but I want to try to keep it as simple as possible to understand without getting too much into detail. But let's say you've prepared an initial study checklist and you've thought that you might have an impact on a historic resource, but you don't have enough information yet at this point to make that determination. Or if you feel strongly enough that by just mitigating the project to say that you need to comply with the Secretary of Interior's standards to get it to a point where it's less than significant, then you would put that as a mitigation under a mitigated negative declaration. That's kind of like the one solid mitigation measure you can really impose on historic resources without them losing their significance. There's been in the past, people have tried mitigating through, just surveying the property and taking photographs and logging those and making sure you have a complete record of it. But then there's been case law in the past that says that's no longer adequate mitigation. So if the project is actually going to have a significant impact on the resource, then you need to prepare an environmental impact report. So the main purpose of the environmental impact report is to give full disclosure of the impacts on the project. And then the one thing that the environmental impact report does that's different than a neg deck or even a categorical exemption is that it requires you to look at alternatives to the project. So if the project requires you to demo the building, or if that's what's being asked under the project description, then an alternative you might look at is either relocating the property or just downsizing the project site so that the building would still remain and you wouldn't actually impact the building. So you have to look at a series of different alternatives under an EIR that you wouldn't have to do under a negative declaration or mitigated negative deck. And then also, if there are significant unavoidable impacts to that resource, then under CEQA you're required to make specific findings that basically say that the benefits of the project would outweigh that significant impact. So that requires what's called a statement of overriding considerations, and that has to be adopted by the local agency as well. CEQA also requires that even if you can't mitigate it to a less than significant, if there's feasible mitigation measures, you still need to apply those to a project. And that's getting back to the whole photographic kind of thing. That's a lot of people use that as a mitigation measure, even though you're still going to have a significant unavoidable impact, at least by mitigating basically documenting the resource existing and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the, a mitigation that would be feasible and would likely be required under an EIR. And in some cases, you can actually relocate the building if under a feasible alternative, as long as where you're locating the building, it would actually still convey its historical significance. So we had a project, the Cedar Mini Park EIR, which we did, which specifically looked at just historic resources. The project originally was to demolish all the buildings on site and then just put the mini park in, but the City Council ultimately went with one of the alternatives, which was to maintain the one historic resource on site and preserve it and use it for part of the park. But one of the mitigation measures we had in there was to relocate the building to another alternative site if one did become available. So it wouldn't actually reduce it to less than significant, but it was still a feasible mitigation measure if someone approached the city and said, yeah, I can move it to my vacant site, and it's kind of the same setting as the neighborhood that it came from. Then that would be mitigation, although it wouldn't reduce it to a less than significant impact. So at this point, I kind of like to open it to questions because I'm sure you have a few. Just it's a really difficult law to apply.
He just read you this whole book.
And specifically with resources, the historic resources are one of the more difficult things to deal with in terms of environmental review. So,
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Yes, please.
Let's say somebody comes in, proposes a project, and you're supposed to demo this building. You photograph it, you evaluate it, that it's, it has to go through a demolition process. Now, what kind of what kind of mitigation measures would you put on there? Let's say if it's a local resource.
If it's a local resource and you would demolish it,
yeah,
then that would automatically trigger an environmental impact report, and you'd have to go through different alternatives within the EIR, and then we would more than likely require you at the very minimum to document the property. And usually it's done through, per historic archival building records, is that what it's called? The HABS documents is typically how you would have to document the resource, which means you're taking specific measurements of where all the buildings are located, outbuildings, the building itself, the size, photographing it, doing, drawings that would actually, somebody could literally build the thing back if they ever wanted to.
But under CEQA, that doesn't count.
It would not count as full mitigation. No.
That won't count. Okay,
No.
that was my question.
And we have an example of two craftsman houses in Glendale, one very high significance, locally eligible, and one a really nice craftsman that fell into kind of the lower category. Someone proposed to demolish both of those and build a multi-unit project on the site. Originally, we had talked about the potential to move the more significant resource, and it was looking like it was impossible to find a site. And that's a project that's currently in design phase, where they're actually proposing a building that would be an L-shaped building that keeps similar, perhaps even a better solution to what happened with the Good House over here, where there would be new construction that partially encroached on the site, but the resource itself would stay intact. And that has an impact. It has an effect, and the question is, can we say it's not a significant adverse impact, or is that a mitigation? So I think there are a bunch of different solutions.
But during that review process, let's say somebody wants to demo it. You documented the building, whatever you need to be doing. Do you compare it to other buildings within the same area that exist, or so you can justify it?
Well, in terms of what we would do is we would apply the local criteria to see if it's, go through the different criteria at a local level, and one of the ones that usually comes up is whether it's the best remaining example of that style in the neighborhood. That's pretty typically evaluated in our CEQA documents to make a justification as to whether or not we can allow demolition and whether that would be a significant impact or not. But if it's a listed property, then it definitely falls under the definition of a historic resource under CEQA. And if you're demoing it, then that's a significant unavoidable impact.
Yeah, and if we had a situation in a historic district where it was a contributing property in a historic district is also considered historic resource under CEQA, the threshold there would be, if this contributing building were lost, would the district itself lose its eligibility? Because the building wasn't identified as individually eligible, just as part of a bigger district. So we'd have to look at the threshold of eligibility, which in our ordinance is 60% plus have to be contributing in a district. And so that's the kind of sad story, where it could come that we have demolition applications in historic districts that under CEQA there wouldn't be a significant impact because we'd still have a historic district even if that property disappeared. So
my last question, Mr. Cross, let's say if it's not a local resource, you document it, do you compare it to anything else in the neighborhood to justify again the demolition?
Yeah, and when a development application comes through, if we think it might be locally eligible, then we would require the applicant to prepare some sort of assessment and evaluate it per the local criteria. Okay. So we have something to actually look at, and then we would work with Jay Platt on determining whether or not it was in fact a resource, make a determination that way. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. In terms of expediting the CEQA process and the EIR process, could you comment, or one of you comment on the advantage of a survey as opposed to not having anything on the, like, what does that buy you or not?
Well, I mean, that would save you, it would save money in terms of actually having a resource survey completed for the project. And if you have the resource survey, then you can identify which ones are resources and which ones aren't. Conceivably, if a planner's at the counter, then they would know right away whether or not there's a potential issue with a historic resource on that site, and they can convey that to the applicant. I mean, the only issue with the resource surveys under CEQA, if it's more than 5 years old, then it's no longer an adequate survey, and it would have to be resurveyed every 5 years, essentially.
So for, say, a house that isn't protected, it's not a contributing structure, it's not a landmark, it's never been assessed as being eligible for anything, and somebody wants to do a really severe modification or alteration or demo the property, there would be, what would be triggered in that situation?
Well, I mean, it's CEQA would be triggered in that situation. Anytime you have a project that has a potential impact, in that case it would be, if there's a potential resource on site, then you would trigger CEQA automatically with that, whether it meets one of the different exemptions under CEQA. Like typically in CEQA there's an exemption for 6 units or less. If you have a project that's 6 units or fewer, then it's exempt from CEQA unless you have some other issue on the site. In that case, we would look at the historic to determine whether or not that would be an impact. And if so, then we require them to submit an environmental information form so we could conduct CEQA.
Other question? No more questions.
Thank you. That was very informational.
Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm. 8B, Commission Review of Mills Act Status Chart featuring work proposal deadlines and updates.
Okay, this is the debut of your Mills Act status chart that you requested. And what we're going to do with this is just keep this as a running document that as the Commission is conditioning work through Mills Act contracts, we're going to make sure that you stay on top of it, that I stay on top of it, and that we work with the owners to make sure that the work is going to happen within the time frame that we established, or the owner could come back theoretically and ask, make an explanation of why they can't do that and ask for more time, and the Commission could either grant or deny that. We have not taken any of our 2010 properties. We don't actually have Mills Act contracts for any designations this year yet, so that won't happen until the end of the year. So the only 2 that are in play right now with actual conditions on them are 1117 Rossmoyne, which has a garage door replacement that you requested by the end of this year. In that case, I've spoken several months ago. The owner called and we had a discussion about appropriate garage doors and what we were looking for. I gave her some of the materials that we had looked at. The Commission had, at one of our meetings, we looked at garage doors maybe a while ago. I can't remember what month that was. And she kind of understands, so based on putting this together, I'm going to follow up with her to make sure she's on track to get this done by the end of the year. I think she has a lot of options, and I think she was ready to go forward when we talked a little bit ago. And then 1455 Royal is the McCall's house that we alluded to today, the Merrill Baird French Revival, and that had a garage roof that was taken off during an earlier renovation. So the owners agreed to rebuild a very steeply pitched kind of pyramidal roof up there and also install some shutters at the front. So that work is, we haven't talked about that for a while, but I think we're in good hands with the ownership and the condition and the desire to do that work. There was one condition that the Commission put on a house up on Rosemount, which was just to paint the garage doors, and that work was done before we even went to council, so I didn't include that on the list. So as far as I can say, this is our complete list, and I assume it'll grow.
Mr. Chair, on 1339 Romulus, wasn't there a deck involved too? Or is that a later face.
In terms of getting the permit for the deck?
Yeah.
Yeah, I may have omitted that. I'll double check the notes, but
And we had asked for them to replace the
Right.
wood balcony below that was
yeah.
so
Yeah.
treacherous.
we did?
We asked, I think, for that to be a condition of the mills.
Oh, I don't remember that. Okay, so would that be
I
the
think it was the lower
flooring?
deck, the
Okay.
flooring on the lower balcony.
I don't think we conditioned that.
We talked about
We
it.
talked about it, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
And we asked
remember.
if it could be part of their work plan.
Okay, let me double check. We can't go back and ask for something we didn't
Yes.
put
Sure.
on record on that day, so I'll double
We
check.
conditioned that.
No?
I remember
No.
we talked about it.
Sounds like something she would want to do if it's,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
bad. And it's the kind of thing we'll review, before she gets a permit for it. But I'll double check on the lower deck.
I have two other questions. On the contract year, is it the year the contract was signed or the year it went to council?
It's going to be the same, because the contracts have to be done by December 31st. So all of these properties, both of these are scheduled to go to council on October 12th, and we may sneak another couple in after that, so.
I think you might be missing one on Cortez.
Did we have a condition on
Well, 20.
Cortez? What was the condition there? Oops.
There are three
Okay.
by 2011. Working fountain.
Oh, no, this isn't the voluntary work that people put in their work
Oh.
program. This is the work
In
that
order
the
to
commission
get-
specifically says,
Oh, got it.
we won't give you the Mills Act unless you do this work. So
Oh, okay.
you kind of snuck in with the more voluntary. I didn't go through all of the previous work programs that people had submitted.
Okay, do we need to be following up on that as part of the?
That's actually a city attorney
Actually-
question. Those weren't written into the contract, but the question is does the application become part of the contract? It's not an actual attachment to the contract.
That's going to be my question, Dave. We often have applicants that provide volunteer suggestions in their application as to what sort of work they want to do, but that's not necessarily recorded or conditioned by the commission.
No,
There's
it's
some
in-
ambiguity now, I guess, as to whether that's part of the Mills Act contract.
Yeah, I think this chart came out of our idea of when we were talking about how to beef up the Mills Act program and make owners a little more responsive to the demands and keep them more not more honest, but keep them part of the program. And so I think the idea was that more and more we were going to condition things as a commission that we thought needed to be done.
Okay, but those, like when you present a work plan, but then some of those items end up in the Mills contract, would those not fall on a list like this for?
If they get written into the Mills contract, the Mills contract
Okay.
specifically has an exhibit
Yeah.
that lays out this work with the dates on it. And historically, we've never held people to those work programs, even though we put it into the nomination form. So the idea was I don't think we can go back and put
No, not going back,
those
but
things
going
in.
forward. But
Yeah, going forward, definitely.
okay.
And what we're in effect doing is holding future or recent Mills Act applicants to a kind of a higher standard than we've held other applicants. We can't kind of go backwards
Right.
and bring
It's all
everyone else in.
contractually based, though.
Yeah. Mhm.
Could you add a status column to this, just so, for instance, you've had communications with the owner on
Sure.
Rossmoyne, just so we know that, because
Right.
that's coming up to a couple months away.
Okay. Definitely.
Great.
If I may, Jay and Commissioner or Chair Mirian, is the assumption that we're going to see the update on this every month at every meeting?
It's going to be provided to the commissioners. We're not going to itemize. We're not going to agendize it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but presumably in our annual report or whatever it is that we might do at the end of the year, we could
Yeah.
revisit this
Yeah, well-
publicly as an agenda item.
In theory, if we go for a couple of months where we don't have any new information,
Okay.
we'll just skip it, and
Yeah.
as it gets updated, you'll get a new copy. So.
Question. I just want to make sure I understand this. So do I understand that the house on Cortez, we were talking about some things that got included in the work plan as work the owners intended to do. Going forward, after we made the decision to follow up on, and hold owners accountable and responsible, we're not going retroactive, but going forward, these types of things will be itemized and included on your list.
Yeah, and I think it's
Okay.
the very specific things. There are certain things like everyone's going to need a new roof someday. a lot of people put in, we think we might put a new roof on in 2015. It's total speculation, and we don't want to force someone to take off what might be a good roof just because they agreed to do it. So I think these are kind of very specific things, like get a permit for something, or if there was a house that you thought was a fantastic example that was really worthy, but it had an addition that you just thought you couldn't take, if the owner said, hey, we'll get rid of the addition because we want to do this, we condition that. So, I think it'll be for one-off types of things rather than routine things.
Okay.
But it could be something like your fountain.
Yeah.
If everyone said, look at that tile, it's so sad that the fountain isn't working, or restored. I don't know that we could force through a condition that you keep water running in your fountain, but to actually restore it, I think that's the kind of thing we could do.
So let me clarify. Previously, you didn't tend to put work plan items into the Mills contract, but any contract, no matter what year it was done, if it has criteria in there that they needed to do and it's in the contract, it should be on this list.
No, because until now, we haven't conditioned work through the contracts. It was only in recent years that we even asked for a work plan.
Yeah.
And then before that, we just kind of gave away the Mills Act. And it was like, here's your Mills Act. There was no follow-through on our part. So the idea, the protection there is that those owners still, anytime they need to pull a permit, and even on things when they don't need a permit, they're supposed to come to us. And so we're still expecting the Mills Act properties to be, worked on at the highest preservation level that we have for the exterior parts of the property. But that's what we have. That's kind of the teeth we have for the older Mills Act properties.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So you can wait for your fountain if you want.
I think it's in the contract.
I'll double check. Yeah, I'm gonna.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure we did comments from the commissioners. Did we do that? I don't think so. Any comments?
You had moved it. We had also talked about moving, or did we already
went
do
over
that?
that.
We did that already. Yes, okay. Good.
It's time to adjourn, but I just want to inform you or just let you know that I went to an extensive trip to Scandinavian countries, and I wanted to write a letter to Hassan, encouraging him to send Mr. Allen to go and visit some of these places.
If you guys take a vote on this, we'll have to do that.
Yeah, you'd have to, yes.
But now,
Vote on this?
but now that I have the microphone, I am just going to say it into the microphone. I went to Prague, Stockholm, and Tallinn, and Helsinki. These are so beautiful cities that every architect should go and every urban planner should go and see. And since we are dealing with Historic Preservation Commission, and we all can't go together, I think the city should send you there.
Wait a second.
How about him? He's singled out there.
Listen, that would be a little too much for me to ask. I am hoping that Arlene from there could pitch for you or somebody else.
Pitching for me.
Really? Now all the selfish things come out here.
Specifically in Tallinn, I saw a building, two buildings actually, very close to each other, one in an alley, one in a larger street. The facade was preserved, and it was a very old building. And behind it, about 3 feet behind, there was a new office building built. And the color of the building was such that the new building was receding, and the old one on the street front so beautifully preserved, and about 700 degree different from the one building that we have on San Fernando, where Aljamak was moved, a new building they built behind it. It just is.
You don't think the new building recedes and Aljamak comes forward?
But anyway, I'm not just going to just talk too much about it, but I think it's a must that we go and see these cities. It just uplifts your spirit and sharpens your taste, and it makes you feel good, and I think I'll be feeling good for a while. Okay. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
It's actually not a comment, it's a follow-up. I think a meeting ago, Commissioner Mardian asked about the Seeley building, and we were going to get an update because it's obviously something's going on there, but it's sort of looks like it's stalled, and we were concerned about that.
It went to sleep for a while because they had some financing issues. Those have been resolved, and meanwhile, their permits had expired. So we restamped the permits a month ago, restamped all the drawings, and so they obtained new permits to continue working. I don't think they've started up again, but the intention is to get going on that. So the next step would have been, if we thought it had been stalled, they'd put up some temporary barricades to keep people out of the building. That looked okay, but not great. So I think as a commission, we'd ask them to kind of really secure a building if it fell into that situation. But hopefully they're going to get moving again.
Okay. Thank you, and I'd like to adjourn the meeting. The meeting is adjourned at 4:30. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.